Welcome to Black Expat Stories, the show where we dive deep into the experiences of Black people across the diaspora who have boldly decided to immigrate abroad in search of a better life. I'm your host, Courtney Bowden, and I'm a Black American writer who also took the leap of faith and moved overseas. Joining you from my own slice of paradise, right here in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, today's virtual voyage takes us to one of my favorite places, Mexico City. You're going to meet Adalia, a financial educator and relocation specialist guiding women to financial freedom and location independence. Before her international move, Adalia spent 2 decades in the States as an overworked and underpaid educator. Now she travels the world and only works when she wants. In this conversation, we'll explore her leap into expat life following a pivotal divorce, how she navigated an international move as a single mother of a teenager, what financial freedom means to her and how she's achieved it, and her extensive experiences living in countries like China and Kuwait. Get ready for another riveting conversation that's sure to inspire your wanderlust. Here's my conversation with Adalia. Hi, Adalia. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So, I'm really excited about this conversation because one, you are based in one of my favorite places, Mexico City, and two, you have an interesting expat journey, and I'm looking forward to diving into it. So, as I like to start with all of my guests, what was the catalyst for moving abroad? And where did you begin your expat journey?
The word catalyst makes me think of a single incident or event, and it really wasn't that way for me. I had always wanted to live outside the US. When I was younger, I thought it was going to be Canada. In high school, I thought possibly it was going to be France because I was studying French. But those dreams were put on hold because of life. And it really wasn't until I took back control of my life right after turning 40 that I was taking stock of everything in my life and was determined to live whatever years I had left in such a way that there were no regrets. I was not spending time doing anything I did not thoroughly enjoy. And I just remember sitting down one day thinking about there was a obvious value misalignment between me and the United States. And I did not feel that I could ever be my full, complete self in a country that glorifies individualism and American exceptionalism and is not very tolerant. It's not a very tolerant place. So that that I don't want to call it an epiphany, but that thought process led me to the obvious answer is to leave. And
Mm.
despite my dissatisfaction with my career at the time, it was my career that allowed me to leave within the next few months because I secured a job at a small international school in Honduras. And that is where I first moved to as an expat.
Awesome. So you started in Honduras. And could you share with our viewers and listeners what your profession was?
Was in K-12 education for, at that point, 19 years. The vast majority of the time was spent in the social sciences, history, geography, but I also worked in instructional technology for a portion of my career as well.
So you got a job opportunity that allowed you to exit the United States and begin your expat journey in Honduras. Now, I also understand you made that international move with your 15-year-old at the time, right? What
Yep.
was her response? What was her response to the idea? And what kind of influence did she have on the decision making for that move?
Initially, because I told you, I had always wanted to live abroad. And so once I dropped that dead weight of a husband, I was like, eventually this will happen for me. but she was in like eighth, ninth grade. So I said, I'll wait until she graduates. And then I thought, why do I have to wait? And so I decided I didn't have to wait. I proposed it to her. I said, I am going to do this thing. I would like you to come with me. I don't know where I'm going yet, but if there is a particular country that you would like to live in, I will focus my job search in that country. I also pitched it as a study abroad. Like, you don't have to finish high school with me, but no a year. See how you like it. If you like it, you can stay with me. If you don't like it, you can go back and live with your dad. And she was not enthusiastic about it at all. She was like, that's cool for you, but no thanks. I'm going to stay here.
Oh my goodness. It's so interesting because I've met some expat families here who have had a similar experience, especially with teenagers, because they're in school, they have their friends, they have the events, their extracurricular activities, maybe some of the conveniences that they appreciate as a result of living in the States. So she said, "That's cute for you, but
Yeah.
as for me, I'm good." So obviously she changed her mind, right?
She did change
Somehow.
her
How did that
mind.
happen?
Honestly, I think she had a disagreement with her dad. And she was like, hey, is that offer still on the table? Now, by this time, I'd already accepted the job in Honduras and told them I was coming by myself. And so I said, I'd love to have you with me, but this is where we're going. I don't know if she had been on board in the beginning. I don't know if Honduras is necessarily a country I would have chosen, but that part had already happened. And I talked to the school and they were like, no, it's not a big deal, long as she can meet the entry requirements. She did. And she came and she had the time of her life. And it was actually a struggle for her to choose to go back to the US. She very much contemplated staying abroad.
So what inspired her to go back to the United States ultimately?
Primarily, it was her involvement in extracurricular. She was in FFA, Future Farmers of America, and she'd gotten into that. She'd taken agriculture class when she was in eighth grade. And it's hilarious because I am a city girl through and through. And that my child was like, but I want to raise a pig.
It's like, where did
And
she get that
so
from?
because I don't know. So her desire to do that outweighed everything else. So she went back to the States so she could continue with the FFA stuff she was doing. And she raised several pigs over the next couple of years.
That's incredible that she got the chance to embark on this new experience, which she was initially resistant to, had the time of her life, and still was able to go back and pursue her own path. And what I think is also interesting and refreshing to hear, especially as a mother, because as women, we are conditioned to put everybody else ahead of ourselves. And so, what was powerful in what you said was you went to your child and you said, "Hey, this is what I plan on doing. I would love for you to come with me. However, here are your options." You didn't stop your life. And I think that oftentimes we can do that. And I don't have children, so I can't speak definitively from experience on this matter, but I do understand that as women, we are conditioned to do that and to wait, right? And so after you reclaimed your life, what was your family's response to your decision?
Well, I can speak to it because I had done it for 40 years. I had put everybody's priorities ahead of myself. And at this point, I was like, I'm done with that. My family is very small. There wasn't I don't think, and I say this all the time, for the people who matter, there was not a single person when I said, I'm leaving the US, that really took a second look. It was like, of course you are. Now, there may have been some folks who had some things to say, but they didn't say them to my face. But the people who mattered were all like, oh, yeah, I'm surprised you hadn't done this already.
And why is that? What was it about you to them that made it obvious?
I'm a math nerd. I'm a geographer at heart. I am the person that we're at some restaurant and I can tell you the origin of the dish and who these people were and all that kind of stuff. You add to that I travel. I love to travel. I travel a lot. And so I guess if there's anybody who's gonna uproot their life and go live in another country, I seem like the obvious person for that to be.
Now, I want to go back to your career as an educator. For nearly 20 years, you felt like you were overworked and underpaid as an educator in the States. Now you travel the world and you only work when you want, which I definitely think that's a flex. And I'm sure so many people want to know, how have you managed to do this?
I managed to do it partially because I moved abroad. I think in the US particularly, we get caught up with always wanting more. And I think spending 20 years making a teacher's salary, you either learn to adjust to that or you end up with a whole lot of debt. Okay. The way I look at life is okay, I can't do everything. I don't make that kind of money. So, what are the things that are most important to me? And for me, I wanted to live a life centered on travel. I can travel. I can travel quite affordably. And so I started redesigning my life in such a way that it centered travel. I make sure that my priorities are funded and then I worry about the rest of the stuff. What my philosophy is all about, do I have enough money to do the things I want to do? And if I've got enough money to do that, how much money I make is not that important. So I left the US where I was already not making any money. And I moved to Honduras and took a 60% pay cut
Whoa. A
because
60%
nobody,
pay cut from what you are already making in the States. And we know
yes,
educators are grossly underpaid.
yes, nobody comes to Latin America for the money.
Mm.
And even with doing that, I had been saving money for retirement primarily just in a Roth IRA, which only now has a contribution limit of $7,000 a year. So I didn't start with that much money because I didn't make it. They always say time in the market is more important than timing the market. So I just put my money in and I let it do what it was supposed to do. I looked around after my time in Honduras and I looked at what my cost of living had been. And that's when it really clicked. Oh, you don't need near as much money as you would if you were still in the US. So that's a big part of it, not being in the United States, because that has lowered my cost of living significantly. And while I was working a traditional job, my savings rate was for a big chunk of time was 50% or more, depending. When I moved abroad, I could save 70, 80% of my income. But when I
Wow.
was still in the US, it was somewhere between, let's say, 30 and 50, depending. Saving as much as I could, investing and lowering my expenses, it does not take as much money to live this life now, as opposed to if I was still in the US trying to live like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make, especially for those of us who have relocated to Central or Latin America. And that is often a big draw for those who do decide to move. And I also think it's interesting that you were able to reprioritize your life because you're right. In the States, it is often about accumulating and amassing more. It's like it's never enough. And when you either decondition or you arrive in a place where you recognize that no, it doesn't take that much to live a life of fulfillment, a joy, of peace, it radically shifts the way that you approach your life. And I tell people all the time, moving abroad can certainly be a wealth building strategy. Would you agree with that?
It can be, but strategy is the key part of it. Simply leaving the US is not enough. You've got to have a strategy. You've got to prioritize the things that are important. You've got to make sure that your spending aligns with those priorities.
Absolutely. And speaking of spending, Adelia, you are a financial educator who also empowers other people to design their lives. So, what does financial freedom mean to you? And what has been your approach to achieving financial freedom in addition to saving aggressively?
Financial freedom for me means being able to leave a situation that I don't want to be in and not having to stay because I don't have the money.
Yeah. Can we talk about that though, especially as women and women who partner with men, right? Because for those who don't know, it wasn't until 1974 that women could have our own bank accounts, right? And later, when we're talking about lines of credit and business ownership, etc. So what you're saying seems obvious to maybe some who don't understand just how short of a time we have had to achieve and experience financial independence.
Exactly. And my life, there were times in my life that I made decisions based on how much money I had. And that forced me to make some decisions that were not good for me. I never wanted to be in a situation. Again, this is first half of my life. Woo, not great. But I was determined that this second part would be lived in such a way where I only had to do the things, only did the things I wanted to do. I was no longer bound by obligation. I was no longer bound by, oh, financially, I've got to stay here and do this thing. And I'm going to be 100% honest and transparent. I didn't start investing in my 20s. I was well into my 30s before I started. I was a school teacher, so I made no money. I had no idea how poorly I was being paid until I started working with clients who I realized how many people made so much more money than I did. So
Mhm.
I started late. I didn't have an abundance of money. I did not come from people with money. Okay. And I did it the simplest, the easiest way possible. I made sure to live within my means, saved aggressively, invested aggressively. And when I say invest aggressively, that does not mean that I'm out here trading stocks and all that. No, because I don't want that to be the focus of my life. I want to be able to sip hot chocolate at the cafe around the corner. I don't want to be thinking about trades. So when I say aggressive, like my portfolio was heavily in stock as opposed to bonds. I don't mean I'm doing like crazy risky things. All of
Okay.
that coupled with being outside of the United States, because all of a sudden the amount of money you need to achieve that kind of freedom is significantly less. Right now, they're talking about if you want to do an average retirement in the United States, you're going to need $2.5 million.
On top of that, they're talking about raising the the retirement age to 70, right? So it's by design that we are to work until we die, the average person. And so you decided that wasn't how you were going to go out at all. And I love the message that you have about it not being too late, because I think that also in our society, we're conditioned to prioritize youth and to say, look, if you haven't made it by 30 or whatever age, then you ain't gonna make it and it's too late. But you are here as a shining example of what is possible. And now you empower other women to take charge of their finances so they can design a life they love too. What resources and support do you offer?
I offer one on one coaching. I also am in the process of launching a financial confidence academy, because that to me is at the core of what a lot of women are missing. They are missing the confidence to make financial decisions. And you can't delegate that to somebody else. There's a saying about you can't put your happiness in the hands of other people because they will drop it every time. The same is true when it comes to your money. And I am a living example that anybody can do this. So I have a group coaching program that kind of covers all of the financial topics that like we wish we would have learned from our parents or we wish we would have learned in school, so that you are empowered enough to make those decisions, to be able to have a conversation when it's benefit sign up time at the job and you're trying to figure out this 401k thing. The people in HR will only answer the questions you ask. If you don't know what questions to ask, they're not going to be very helpful to you. So that's really where my work focus is. And in this last year, I've combined all of the things that I like to do. I like to talk about money, but I also, as you mentioned, to help women who want to change their life figure out how to do that, because for literally 40 years, I was a very sad and miserable person. And I thought some people got to come to earth and have really good lives, and some people didn't. And I just happened to luck out and was one of those people who didn't get to have one. But
Hmm.
it wasn't too late for me. It is not too late for anybody. And so I partnered with a friend of mine who is a life and leadership coach, and we have created Reclaim the Retreat. It is uh, it's a combination of all the things: coaching, travel, learning of the cultural exchange, learning about other people from in other countries, from the people who live there, all while helping women and femmes build community with other folks who are trying to do the same thing. Because you asked about how did my family and friends react. I was so determined. It didn't matter what other people were going to say. But that's because I was coming from a very low place. But I realized for a lot of folks, not having other people in their lives who want to do something different, who want to do something big, can hold them back. And so a big
Yeah.
element of our retreat is finding your people. Those people you can text on WhatsApp and call and be like, I'm trying to figure out, should I move to this country? How do I do this and that? And you've got somebody that's like, girl, yeah, I'm trying to do the same thing as well. So, in a portion of the coaching we do there, some of it is financial coaching, some of it is life coaching. But those things I do. And then, of course, there's the YouTube channel where I share my experiences and I also interview Black women who are doing incredible things in the same vein.
That's awesome. And I can definitely testify to the power of like-minded community, especially when you are considering or preparing for such a life-changing decision like moving abroad. So many people, especially pre-pandemic, felt like that they didn't have many spaces where they could get the resources and get the support and the encouragement and also the accountability to move forward with their plans. And in this season of the show, we are focusing on spaces, the spaces that Black expats create so that other people can achieve freedom, healing, and belonging. And it sounds like you have done just that. Hey, friends, I want to take a quick moment to let you know that if you want to dive deeper and unlock more advice and insights on expat life, then I encourage you to become a friend of the show. You'll also access other behind the scenes and bonus content you won't see anywhere else. Just head over to blackexpatstories.com/support to upgrade your access. Now, back to the show. I want to talk about country hopping because you have extensive experience with travel and living all over the world. You've lived in China, of course, Honduras, Kuwait, and now right here in Mexico. What were some of your criteria for choosing a location, and how have those evolved throughout your travels?
Before I ever left, I had this table I made, a country shopping table where I was going to comparison shop countries. And I mentioned there is a values misalignment. There's a values misalignment between me and the United States. And so that's where I started. What are those things that are important to me? Treatment of women, equality of women, availability of universal health care, things like that. My ability to get a visa, because I realized I was not going to just be out here on a tourist visa. I wanted to have the legal right to abode in a country. And how hard was it going to be for me to learn the language? Because I was really open to a lot of places. That evolved. I heard this inner voice that was like, you really should learn Spanish. So that's what took my initial job hunt to Latin America, which is wild because in high school, I took Spanish and Latin, French and Latin because I didn't like the way Spanish sounded.
Wow. Full circle moment.
Like, yeah, so here I am in my 40s. Oh no, I want to learn Spanish. And I knew I would need to be able to travel from whatever country this was. So I moved to Honduras and I knew that was not going to be a forever place for me. It was a means to an end. However, living life in Honduras helped me really gain clarity on how important mass transit was to me. Exactly how are we classifying international airports? Because I thought the name really meant something. And really all it means is that there is one flight from outside the country. It means nothing about connected connectivity to other places in the world, that sort of thing. So after I left Honduras, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted, and was set to go and look. And I had narrowed it down to two places that I thought would be a good fit, that looked like a good fit on paper. And that was Medellin, Colombia, and Mexico City.
What broke the tie for you between Medellin and Mexico City?
Nothing. Things did not go like they were supposed to. I had a 2-year contract in Honduras. And then toward the end of the first year, they were like, hey, we got to restructure because there's been a drop in enrollment. This school was tiny. My daughter was like one of 6 or 7 sophomores.
Oh,
Tiny
okay.
school.
Yeah.
So any fluctuation in enrollment is going to make a difference in the bottom line. And so their proposal to me, because I had a non-teaching position primarily, I taught one college level class. They were like, what we need is for you basically to teach all of high school social studies and keep doing your current job. And maybe we can find a stipend. You mean the job that I'm already being underpaid to do?
You're asking me to do on a volunteer basis?
Yeah. And I said, no, thank you. And I will not, I will be back. And so I had purchased a ticket to Mexico City for a kind of go see thing over the summer. And the plan was to do the same in Colombia the next year. But because of what happened with my job, all of a sudden that for a scouting trip turned into, oh, I'm moving to Mexico and I'll just use that week to figure out what neighborhood I want to live in.
Oh my gosh. What a change. And I think that also speaks to the nature of this experience. And what I have learned throughout my experience as an expat is the power of adaptability, of flexibility, and being open to things not necessarily working out the way that you might plan them, but being open also to the possibility that your plan may not be the best plan and something better could be presented to you. I know that you were in China or Asia during the first COVID outbreak. That must have been quite an experience. What was it like for you?
I have a very cynical nature. And so I wasn't afraid. It was a very weird place to be because I don't speak Mandarin. So the media I was consuming at the time was Western media, primarily US media. So I'm being greeted with these scenes of people hoarding toilet paper. There's shortages at the grocery stores, all of this, because when the timing of the outbreak was horrible. It was right at Lunar New Year, which is the largest migration of people in the world. Because everybody who's working in the cities in China, you go home to your village. So right at the beginning of this, where millions, hundreds of millions of people are traveling, we have the outbreak of this super contagious disease, and we don't know what it is or how you get it and all of that. So I'm watching that. But by the time I got back from Lunar New Year vacation, everything was already locked down. And so my apartment community was already restricting coming in and coming out. I had to struggle to get in because they're trying to figure out, like, why don't you have your little pass? And I'm like, I just got back to the country. So lockdown, I was in my apartment. There was plenty of food on the shelves. I was good. My big concern was I didn't want to get sick because I had already had some experience with the Chinese medical system. And on a good day, I don't want that. The last thing I wanted to do was be in that, not speak Mandarin. And I had this fear, could be completely irrational, that I could end up disappeared because there would be these video clips on WeChat going around where like people were protesting against being locked down, and like people would jump out of vans and nets and carry them off somewhere else. So my big concern, I didn't want to get sick because I didn't want to have to interact with the Chinese government or the Chinese medical establishment. So I was content to be in my apartment teaching online. I was not happy when we had to go back to work because it was fairly, as far as interaction, it was one of the better times in China because I had less interaction with the Chinese, but that's a story for another day.
Wow, okay. So you didn't want to interact with the healthcare system and you already had an experience. What was that experience like?
When you get a a visa to come work in China, you have to you have to do a medical thing before you leave, and then as soon as you get there, they want to check because you got to make sure you're not pregnant. They want to make sure you don't have diseases, blah blah blah. And the facility in which this was happening, I just did not see the sanitary precautions being taken that I felt should have been taken. Like, they're seeing me and this row of strange people, and they're like, take off your shirt. Or you go to give them the urine sample, and there's no soap, there's no toilet paper. And
Really?
because the people who work with me were Canadian, they were like, you going to the clinic tomorrow, make sure you bring this and this because they're not going to have it. So that one experience was enough for me to be like, oh no, I don't want this.
So, when moving abroad, Adelia, I know that a country's healthcare system is often one of the main considerations, like you mentioned in your criteria. And having lived in countries with varying systems, which country's healthcare system, and we know it's not China now, but which country's healthcare system felt most aligned with your own wellness approach?
Um, I would say Mexico pre-pandemic because I know Mexico is not a place that comes to mind when people think about like socialized medicine. But in the Mexican Constitution, there are actually a lot of like human rights kinds of things, as well as the access to healthcare. My plan was to get, once I got my residency, was to buy into the public health system here. It's not the greatest, but it was like the first step in my plan. But I left China and came back here to Mexico, and I witnessed the public health system basically collapse. And so I was like, oh, okay, that plan, we're going to have to rethink that plan because that's
Right,
not going to
right.
work. But the ability to get private health care for me as a foreigner is very accessible.
I would agree with that. Adelia, another key consideration when making an international move is safety and security. You moved with your daughter as a single mom, and given the varying political and social climates across various countries, how did you and how do you approach safety for yourself and the communities? How do you safely engage with the communities that you're surrounded by?
I think, and some people might not like what I'm about to say. First, it's coming to terms with with the notion that safety is an illusion. We are not safe anywhere. I am a Black woman. I am not safe anywhere. There is no magical place I can go that's going to be quote unquote safe. And so once you come to peace with that, you understand that it's really about minimizing risk. I do that in the way that I would anywhere else. If I'm going to be out at night, I am walking down streets where there are other people. I am making sure that I'm not flashy. You walk with purpose. You don't look scared, confused, like prey. But at the same time, you are ready because that's the other thing. I think people get lulled into this false sense of security, like, oh, this is a safe neighborhood. So I don't have to worry about X, Y, and Z. And no, those things can happen anywhere, anytime. Mexico City being as large of a city it is, given its reputation, I get asked a lot about that. And my answer is I actually feel safer here than I do in Texas, where I'm from.
Hmm. Yeah, I look, I say this all the time. I feel safer here than I did feel in the States. And to your point, it is not this delusional idea of safety. It is, for me, a large part of it is psychological safety, which I didn't realize how important it was until I landed here. When you're not constantly looking over your shoulder and you're not constantly expecting to be targeted because of how you look or what have you. It is incredibly freeing. So, thank you for sharing that. And having lived so many places, how have you been able to tap into the community and the surrounding cultures?
Here in because this is the only place I have lived where I've actually gotten to choose where I live. And so it was always a given that I would live in a local neighborhood because one of my goals is to improve my Spanish. That is an ongoing goal. Doesn't seem like there's ever going to be an end to it. But the only way that's going to work for me is if I am in an environment where the expectation is that I speak Spanish and that I'm around native Spanish speakers. So I've made a very conscious choice about the neighborhoods that I have lived in. I have taken because I am an introverted introvert. I'm never going to just chat somebody up. So stranger, that's not happening. So I take the things that I am interested in and I will take the class or go to the group and the whole thing is in Spanish and the audience is intended to be local Mexicans. Now, how successful that has all been, it's varied,
Yeah, it's
but
lots of.
that's been one way that I have been able to connect with the local community here. Where I worked in Honduras, some of the staff at the school, that's where they live, that's where they're from. And so sparking friendships with them and when the ladies, the kindergarten teachers, the local kindergarten teachers are getting together to go out for a drink. I don't understand half of what's being said. Still,
Yeah, and that's another beautiful part about this experience is that you can immerse yourself in culture, and one of the best ways to do that is by diving into the language. And even though you may start out not understanding or comprehending everything that's being said, or you may not feel as confident in conversation, eventually you start to it's almost like your ears get start to get tuned to the language. And I experienced this moment when I was sitting at a restaurant with my husband and we were having a conversation, but I was also ear hustling on another conversation in Spanish. And I got so excited because I'm like, oh my God, I know what they said. I know everything that they said. It's almost like you are a radio tuner tuning into a different station. I think of language learning like that. And when you finally like get that awkward staticky phase out, it becomes easier to pick up on things because language is really a pattern. So I appreciate you bringing that up because it is important to immerse yourself in culture through language. Now, Adelia, and I should also say this before I move on to my next question, because having visited Mexico City, like Mexico City is very different from Playa del Carmen in that you gotta speak some Spanish. Like they are not handling you with kids gloves at all. I remember like landing and I try to speak Spanish anyway. Sometimes I just give up and just start going into English, and it is really less of that there than here in Playa, and it has forced me to speak and to put myself out there because I think another part of language learning to get over is the ego of being wrong or sounding crazy or whatever. And what I can appreciate about living here, specifically the Mexican people, in my experience, have been very welcoming. And when you attempt, they meet you where you are. And I've had all kinds of teachers. I've had taxi drivers as teachers. I've had shopkeepers as Spanish teachers. And when you do try, you pick up on so much.
I took that for granted because, yes, you are right. Here, you need to have some vocabulary because there are likely to be more English speakers here because of the size of the city, but they're not evenly distributed. So if you're anywhere like outside of the bubble, you're probably on your own. I took that for granted because when I moved to China, I was like, you speak 3 words of Mandarin. You should really like try and learn some of the language. And I have never encountered people, except in China, where I'm obviously foreign. I am trying to speak the language. And they were like, there was no, oh, I think you're trying to, are you trying to say this? No, it was over and over again. And eventually I said, I'm done. I just resorted to pointing to things and taking a picture of what I want and then showing on my phone. So I really took that for granted for when I lived here before because even like in my neighborhood where like store owners and whatnot, they don't speak English, but I learned to say very early on, I'm sorry, my Spanish is not very good. And then
Yeah.
I say whatever I gotta say. And they're like, don't worry about it. We gonna work this out.
Right. They put the pieces together. So
Yeah.
why do you think that over in China you were met with those blank stares when you were attempting to speak Mandarin?
I used to always say it's a cultural thing. I used to always say that China does not care about you, the foreigner, you as a person who doesn't speak the language. China does not care. So, as a traveler, you go to other countries, you use websites. There's usually an English button. There's something to let you translate. Not a single Chinese app has a translation feature in it, other outside of WeChat, which is like WhatsApp. Nothing does. So here I am, like this solo traveler who's always give me a phone and Google Maps. I can go anywhere. Google is banned in China. So that means I have to use Baidu Maps. It's in Mandarin. I don't read Mandarin. There is no English translate button. I'm trying to order food on the food order app. There's no translate. And because they use characters and not the letters we do, I can't even type it into Google Translate. I've got to screenshot it, then close the app, come into Google, upload the picture, try and make sense of what it says. It is not a culture. And if you think about it from a historical perspective, it makes sense. It is a culture that has been around for a long time that doesn't have a lot of use for the outside world, so to speak. So it doesn't shock me, but I just had in that particular instance, I had never interacted. I've been to more than 50 countries. I have never been someplace where folks weren't like, oh, this poor little foreigner is trying their best, but they can't speak our tonal language. Let me try and help. They were absolutely not.
So it sounds like for anybody watching and listening, if China is on your radar, you want to be mindful of these things. And I have come to learn that a lot of the ways in which we act and we show up are cultural. And before we demonize it as, oh, that's so bad or that's so sad that they don't help you out,
It's just
it's
different.
cultural. It's different. It's not right. It's not
It's
wrong. It's just different.
it's just different. And either you can live with that or you can't. It's not, it's I don't want anybody to think I'm passing a judgment on it, but it was a different experience that taught me, oh no, you would rather be in an environment where you can actually read the letters and that it's a culture of helpfulness.
Yeah. And that is As I have evolved in my own journey of living abroad, I have added some of those things as criteria, as values that are important to me because you got to communicate. And if that one piece, that important piece, is incredibly difficult or you encounter a lot of resistance, it is going to make your experience very difficult and it may discourage you. So thank you for sharing that. Now, Adelia, how do you balance your interactions between the local community and the expat communities of the places that you find yourself in, if at all? And what benefits have you found in each? I know that you said you are very intentional about living in local neighborhoods and socializing so that you can also learn the language. But what is that balance for you between other expats communicating and fellowshipping with other expats and the local community?
I'm not doing very well. I don't balance that one very good, partially because I am an introvert, but also partially because as much as I want to learn Spanish, as much as I want to be fluent, the minute I engage in a Spanish language conversation, it is fight or flight. And I am trying to figure out how can I end this as quickly as possible. So maybe that's just anxiety. But what that does is it makes it very hard to cultivate friendships with folks who don't speak English. So I admit it's so much easier to hang out with Black Americans, Black Jamaicans, whoever else, because we can communicate in English. I know that this is a problem. It is one that I am working on, but it is a work in progress. I would like to have more local friends. At this stage in my life here, I would really like to have more local friends, but I got to work through whatever this language anxiety thing is I have going on because I don't want anybody to feel like they have to talk to me in English. If your native language is Spanish, that I want that to be the language of our friendship. I don't because
Right.
I know the work I have to do to be able to hold a conversation in Spanish. I don't want you having to do that kind of heavy lifting in your own country just to hang out with me. No. So I need to work on that balance.
It sounds like you are conscious about how you show up and how you engage. And that's another part of the expat experience that I think we should have more conversations around is immigrating mindfully. I think that being American citizens, we are often conditioned to believe that our language, our culture is number one, and everybody else needs to cater to us. But the beauty of travel, and even more specifically, the beauty of expathood or immigration or immigrating, however you want to refer to that, is it does force you to confront some of those privileges that we may have that we may not feel we have where we come from, but we definitely carry some privilege. So thank you for mentioning that because it demonstrates that you are migrating mindfully.
It's very important for me to be mindful of how I move in this space because this is not the country I was born in. I am always grateful that they allow me to be here. And I try, and as a Black woman, trying to be mindful of privilege when I've never had privilege before. That's a weird thing there, but
It's trippy.
I am I do try to be mindful of that.
Speaking of mindfulness, Adelia, when I speak to expats, they have so many questions. And admittedly, I don't know everything. I'm only about 3 years into my own journey. But speaking to someone like you who has been doing this for several years and reflecting on your own extensive experience, what piece of advice can you give to those who are thinking about making their own move abroad? You've covered a lot, and I think that those who are considering it have already you've dropped many gems. But if someone were to ask you for one piece of advice, what would you tell them?
My biggest thing is you can't have expectations of another place, of another people, because those expectations set you up to get your feelings hurt. You have to embark on this move being completely open and being flexible. I think if there's anything that will sink your journey abroad, it is inflexibility in any and every way you can imagine.
Yeah, I can see how that can be true. And so, what are some lessons or insights that you wish you had known before starting your journey? Not saying
So
that you could have known, right? Because a lot of this is experiential. But what do you wish looking back, man, it would have been great to know that beforehand.
this is very trivial, but this is what popped in my head when I moved to Honduras. And Honduras is a special case because it's not a place that gets lots of foreigners moving there. So when you start doing your Googles and you're looking for blogs and all of that, there just wasn't anything. I did not, the whole, and it's a Latin thing, like the kissing people you don't know. Oh, hey, hello. And here, let me kiss
Mhm,
you in your face. I was ill prepared for that. That caught me
mhm.
completely off guard. And I was like, oh, that's what we're doing, huh?
I think that at least in America, we're conditioned to have some type of personal space, like a bubble, and respect that. And it can be different when we are in these places because that was jarring for me as well. So, did you consider yourself an affectionate person or only with people that you know? How does that work for you?
I'm not like some people will say, oh, I'm a hugger. I might hug you, I might not, but I am not going to be touching people I don't know. And
Yeah.
so people not knowing me and just automatically touching me and kissing me, I was surprised. And it took a little getting used to.
Just another
Think
way to show love.
it is, it is. And I was trying to think if there's anything that was like life or death or something I would think is more substantive.
No, this is insightful. So, the Blaxit movement is gaining momentum. I always say that it is not a moment, it is a movement. And we are on the precipice of some major changes that will have a ripple effect across our entire diaspora. So, what are you most excited about when you think about the Blaxit movement and the attention that it's getting and the momentum that's building around it?
I think the thing that excites me is that more of our people are realizing that we have options, that there are places, and I don't need anybody to tell me like, oh, but racism exists everywhere. Yes, it does. But racism is not lethal everywhere. And,
Oh, say
you
that
know,
again.
and people forget the Black American experience is very specific. And for us, racism is often lethal. So when I see more and more of us saying, I got to get out of this, I got to leave the US, I'm like, yes, because there are places you can go where people will just be mildly classist towards you, but nobody's going to physically harm you because of who you are, what you look like. So the idea that there's a broadening mindset of, oh, we don't have to stay here and keep suffering under this regime, that there are options. And hearing and seeing more Black people really believe that those options are available and accessible to them. Black people leaving the US is not new. It is, I feel it is far more accessible to somebody who is not a celebrity, somebody who's not a celebrated artist and that sort of thing. I was a geography teacher from Texas, and here I am now.
Absolutely. We have luminaries like Nina Simone, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, who did take the leap. And some of them lived abroad for a time and some of them came back. But you're right. This is not new. We're not new to this. We are true to this. And ever since the dawn of time, we have migrated. And I just am of the belief that we belong wherever our feet tread. And one of the most powerful things about this movement is that more people I'm starting to see are believing that to be true for themselves as well. So, what are some of your concerns when you think about the Blaxit movement?
Particularly because I live here in this city, which, as a friend of mine calls it, is the citiest city you can imagine. Like all of the things you associate with big cities, Mexico City has them. And if you are not, and I said, go into it with no expectations, but you also do need to understand how places work and that how things work back home is not how they're going to work there. So how are you going to adapt? So I am concerned about folks who lack that flexibility, that when faced with what is just a reality of life, living in a place, their reaction is, this is wrong, or they shouldn't be doing this. Let's let's think about how do things work here. So I am concerned that, I guess this is a long-winded way to say, I am concerned that some people are choosing destinations because other Black people chose them and not being critical about, does this place fit me and the life I want to live?
Yeah, I
Because
guess
I have a profound love for Mexico City, but this place is not for everybody. And I would hate that somebody's like, oh, Adelia loves Mexico City. I'm going to move there. They get here and they're like, oh my gosh, it is crowded. It is loud. It is expensive. And it's not the same experience for them as it was for me because they didn't really take a moment to really evaluate what they're looking for in a new home. So that concerns me.
that's a legitimate concern. And it's one of the reasons why Black expat stories exist as a platform, because we are diving deep into these expat journeys. And I also understand that people are making their decisions based off of the content that they are encountering on social media. And oftentimes it can be glamorized. And once people land in the place that they've chosen based on somebody else, it can be a rude awakening. So thank you for sharing that and mentioning that. It is certainly something for aspiring expats to think about. Before we wrap up, for those who are inspired by your journey, this has been an incredible conversation. And I'm so grateful that we have gotten the chance to get connected. Where can folks connect with you to learn more about you, about your Financial Confidence Academy, and the support that you offer to other women who want to live a life of financial freedom?
Probably the best place to find me is on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It is called Picky Girl Travels the World. That's me. I'm the picky girl. I'm a picky eater, but turns out I'm picky about some other things too. So the name fits in multiple ways. I have a lot of videos. I go live pretty much every week and discuss all of these things: my life abroad, traveling alone as a Black woman, financial topics. What are the realities of living this life as a single Black woman? All of those kinds of things. I'm also on Instagram. I can't guarantee the quantity and quality of the content I put on Instagram, but if you want some regular, everyday kind of stuff, YouTube.
Great. Delia, thank you so much again for taking the time to stop by the show and share your journey, share these incredible insights from your expansive experience. And I look forward to even more conversations in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching as we continue exploring the journeys of Black expats finding freedom, healing, and belonging across the globe. Are you feeling inspired to embark on your own expat journey? Hit subscribe to join the conversation and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Black Expat Stories for sneak peeks and more expat insights. Now, if these conversations resonate and you want to help this platform grow, then I encourage you to become a friend of the show. Not only will you enjoy early ad-free access to new episodes, exclusive bonus content, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, you'll also be supporting our mission to amplify the voices of the pioneers at the vanguard of the next great migration. Just head to blackexpatstories.com/support to join our growing community. However you choose to connect, keep your passport ready and your dreams without borders. Until next time, I wish you peace, love, and passport stamps.